Welcome.
Thank you.
DePaul. Well, let's start from the beginning. The question that you probably are going to get, and you always get, is how did you break into this business, right? That's like the obvious one, right?
I broke into this business in a way that will be the least helpful to the students of DePaul University. Right. I was an undergraduate at Harvard. I was a comedy nerd, a TV nerd, a movie nerd. And I got there, and there was this crazy sort of castle building that published a magazine called the Harvard Lampoon, which people used to know what that was, but not so much anymore. But there used to be a magazine which gave rise to the National Lampoon. And I made it sort of my life's work to join that. I went to Harvard thinking I would be a lawyer. Maybe I'd be a funny lawyer, but I'd be a lawyer. And my parents are still somewhat disappointed that I didn't think about med school. But, and were I to call them right now, I think they'd actually pay for it. But I went and I joined this organization and sort of realized all I wanted to do was sort of write comedy. And rightly or wrongly, the Lampoon has sort of proven itself to be a bit of a pathway to comedy writing. Right. And so I was, between my junior and senior year, the Lampoon did a TV project at what was then the brand new Comedy Central. There had been two companies, Time Warner and Viacom, that were each losing $10 million a year on two different comedy channels, you young people. One was called H-A with an exclamation point, and it was terrible. And there was another one called the Comedy Channel, and that was terrible. And the two companies decided, what if we join together and only lose $5 million each? And they created Comedy Central. And back then, you had to like pay $2 extra to get Comedy Central on your cable box. So again, this was something no one was really seeing. However, they agreed to make this fake 10th anniversary documentary about MTV called MTV Give Me Back My Life. And they hired a couple of us from the Lampoon to sort of write it and produce it. And if you ever find it, it is truly one of the worst things you will ever see in your life. Everything about it is wrong. The casting is terrible. The directing is terrible. Things like the interviews that should have been on film or on videotape. Yeah. Things like the spring break stuff that should have been on videotape are on film. So nothing looks the way it's supposed to. We were promised all these MTV stars would be in it. Nobody's in it. There's just like weird lookalikes and stuff. It's really awful. And it was probably the greatest. I learned more from this just horrific project than probably in some ways on anything I've ever worked on. It was so terrible. And just learned sort of, that's not how you do it, and that's not how you do this, and that's not how you do that, and that person's an idiot, and all those things. But you do have to learn those. And so before I graduated college, I had a TV credit, and I went back to Comedy Central when I graduated, and they were doing comedy coverage of the Democratic and Republican conventions. This would have been in the summer of '92, hosted by then comedy writer, then senator, now not senator, Al Franken. And Al actually was my mentor and brought me over to Saturday Night Live after writing with him for the summer, brought me into Saturday Night Live, where I worked. So you should all go and do that. That's how you should do it. Yeah.
That's easy. I guess one of the best advices that I've ever heard about breaking into the industry was it's like improvisation. You have to take what it comes and say yes and.
Yeah,
and
I mean, there's no great answer. I mean, right. I've worked with so many people. By the way, at Saturday Night Live, I worked with stand-ups that wanted to be in the cast and weren't allowed to be in the cast, and so they became writers, and some of them went on to writing careers. My good friend and office mate, a guy named Steve Coren, started out as a page in the NBC Page program.
Right.
And when he got done at the NBC Page program, he became the receptionist at Saturday Night Live. And at some point they realized he was writing like 50% of Dennis Miller's Weekend Update. And they had to make him a writer.
Right.
He's a great writer. But that was his path. And there's no answer to it, but you sort of, and Steve's a perfect example of, you get in the door, you're the receptionist, you do what you have to do,
right.
Because someone will always take a free joke. When I'm on a set, I'll take a joke from anyone or anything. I mean, if just, some of there are great jokes in everything I've worked on where ADs, cameramen, I mean, you take it from anywhere. But yeah, you have to go with it. And obviously mine was a very specific route, but,
Yeah. So tell us more about Saturday Night Live. You worked with some of the best comedians, people who have
I mean, I was there at a very strange time, and you all look very young, so I don't know where this fits into your worldview. I was there for sort of the end of like Dana Carvey and Phil Hartman and the sort of rise, if you will, of like Sandler and Farley and Spade, like those guys.
In their intermission.
Yeah, so I was like in there during that crossover, and then I left right before like that great next new cast of like Will Ferrell and those guys came in. So I was there 92 to 95, and 92 was amazing because it was an election year, and that show, much like today, when politics is big and interesting, I think SNL rises to the occasion. And so, one of my favorite sketches I ever wrote, that actually Al and I wrote together, was, Bill Clinton jogging into McDonald's and sort of explaining the Somalian warlord situation about how the food deliveries weren't getting places as he took things off people's trays and shoved them in his mouth. That was, Phil Hartman doing Clinton. And it was amazing. It was sort of, it was like, again, these sort of interesting things where it was the best job I ever had and sort of the worst job. You sort of lived there, you slept there, no one really cared about the writers. But what was really amazing, and I guess something to think about, just sort of, especially if you are an actual student here or whatever as you're going forward, is what was really incredible about it was they kind of just throw you in. It's a cliche, they throw you into the deep end, but they really do. And as a writer at SNL, you are really responsible for your piece. So it's, it might only be a, 5-6 minute sketch, but you're not the director, but you're talking to the director, and you're certainly giving notes to the actors. The director is kind of camera blocking, but he's not, or he at the time, and then eventually she, is not necessarily giving performance notes. And so you can give performance notes. You're talking to the set designers, the set decorators, the prop men, the costume people. And so in its own weird way, people often kind of nowadays go like, well, where did you learn to, how did you learn to be a showrunner or whatever? And you sort of, without realizing it, SNL was this sort of amazing sort of, I always jokingly refer to it, SNL was my film school, because that's where I learned to edit. That's where I learned to talk to actors. It's how I learned to talk to just other people. I obviously I'd like to think I became a better writer. I learned about, when I was there were some amazing people, but in particular, besides Al Franken, a guy, if people are into SNL, a guy named Jim Downey, an Illinois native, who longtime producer at SNL and also the early days of Letterman, and is just sort of, possibly the funniest human being alive. And there, to this day, I will write jokes and I'll sort of say to myself, like, well, that's kind of a Franken joke, that's a Downey joke. Like, I'm making it my own, but at the same time, it's something I learned to do. But it was that sort of kind of doing it like that really, for me, was like, learning all these things that, a lot of people kind of go to LA and become writers. And when you're sort of a young writer in LA, you're just in the writer's room. You're trapped in a writer's room. You're just there. You're being fed well, kind of like you're almost like a baby veal. You're kind of just like you're just kind of there, and they're kind of feeding you from really nice restaurants. And sometimes they're feeding you other veal, but that's a separate issue. But you're just sort of there. You don't go to the edit room. You don't go talk to the actors. Often, by the way, depending on the show, the show may be in production in another state. You may be writing in LA for a show that's shooting elsewhere. And so you almost like, yes, you're a writer, great, congratulations, good job, but at the same time, you're so narrow focused in sort of the world of writing that you do see these people who every year kind of rise up in some of these shows and find their way to whatever, becoming, producers, supervising producers, executive producers, everybody in LA is a producer, needless to say. A friend of mine, there's a movie theater in LA, the Cinerama Dome, very famous old movie theater. And when you pull into the parking, you press the button, it says producing your ticket. And I have a friend that always goes, gosh, everybody in LA is a producer. Anyway, it's like you get these people that rise up and it's sort of like, go talk to the actors. And it's like, oh, I've never actually spoken to an actor. Yeah, but you're a producer. Right. How did you become a supervisor producer? So for me, it was this the combination, I guess, of the Lampoon, which in some ways was like being in a writer's room years before I was in a writer's room, and then SNL, really, I think, were these just two very sort of, I don't know, just the real foundations of my work. But, I think they're very creatable yourself. I mean, obviously, you may not be able to necessarily join a stupid 200-year-old, whatever, comedy magazine that nobody cares about, but it just means sort of going out there and finding like-minded people. It's like you make your own Lampoon. I don't know how else to say that. It was much more about being with people, trying to be funny. When you aren't funny, having them make fun of you for sucking so badly that the desire never to be made fun of again forces you to come up with a better joke. It was like comedy harassment. I mean that in the best way. In that it just forced you not to just do the first thought, not just to do here's the joke, everyone, there's certain situations where we could just go, what do you think the joke is? And even though whether you're into comedy or not, even just regular people might just go, oh, we should do something about, I don't know, whatever, Trump, Trump and, he cheated with a porn star. And it's just like, yeah, if everyone can come up with that joke, then that joke is not that funny, I guess is the easiest way of putting it. And so by being around sort of like-minded, funny people, you just started to think a lot about sort of the joke you're not expecting, the joke that surprises you, the joke that sort of thinks outside of the box. And I guess that's just one of those things, to this day when I watch a show, it's what I'm looking for. When I'm reading someone's stuff, it's what I'm looking for.
There's two things that also I think are related from your time at SNL to what you're doing right now. First one is derived from a comment from Tina Fey, that she said that there were two types of writers in SNL, the Harvard boys and the crazy improvisers, right? Who when mixed together are amazing. And you were mentioning earlier.
Yeah, I was sort of Veep right now. If you're watching Veep, is sort of an interesting thing because it's very heavy on the actors are all these really wonderful, as it turns out, like a lot of Chicago people, a lot of Chicago improvers, a lot of Chicago actors out of the theater scene. That was, Julia was at Northwestern. That's her origins too, was theater, honestly, before she was ever on SNL or anything else. And so it's all these, just real sort of Chicago actor people with strong improv backgrounds. And then the writing staff, whether anyone realizes or not, because of me, is very heavy on Harvard Lampoon, men and women.
Yes.
And it's just this really interesting mix where, in a different way than perhaps an improv, or although I recommend improv classes for anyone that's interested in comedy writing, I never did it myself, but I certainly would have. If I was here in this city, I would do it. If I had been around when like UCB was starting, I would have done it in a second. Because it's a very similar thing. It's that sort of like striving to sort of think of the other joke or the thing you can add on top of it and keep it going and keep the laugh rolling and building and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, Veep is sort of the same thing as she sort of ended up with it at both SNL and I guess on some of her other shows. Yeah.
Excellent. And the other thing that I noticed is Julia did a SNL show at that time. Did you meet her then?
No, she was before me. She was there a very unhappy time where, and I don't ever want to speak for her, but you get the sense that back then, I think they were much more interested in looking for her to be sort of like the sexy girl on SNL and not particularly interested in her being that funny, even though she obviously is funny. And if you go back and watch, and she sort of hates when you go back and watch, but you can find these things, these moments. Boy, she did this one sketch that kills me to this day called the Spit Take Talk Show, where basically it's just, it's this with a guest, and it's like, so tell me about yourself. And I just was in France, and it's just her spitting and spitting and spitting and spitting. And I mean, she's just, she's obviously, you don't need me to tell you what a brilliant comedian is, but then you go back and go, well, why didn't they use her? Well, why didn't they use her? Obviously, I can't answer that, but they had their stupid reasons. So I don't think it was a happy time for her. Well, I think she has enjoyed going back guest hosting, which is fun, yeah.
And then from there, Seinfeld. How'd that happen?
I did 3 years at SNL, which at the time sort of seemed like dog years, like each one counted for like 7 or something. I went in with like blonde hair, and by the end of the 3rd year, I was this gray. And I was starting to think I might be developing an alcohol problem, because I would go home, we would like have the show and then go to the party and then go to the after party and then go to some other crazy after party. And then I would tape the show every Saturday, and I would watch the show at 5 in the morning, like when I got home. And the longer I was there, the worse I thought the shows were getting, and also, whatever, you're unhappy and whatever. But I was also a New Yorker who didn't have a driver's license, so the idea of moving to LA seemed a little insane. But I was a diehard at that point, especially Seinfeld fan. And Simpsons fan, and certainly if either of those had come a calling, I came very close to taking a job actually at News Radio, which I would have been thrilled to work on. That's, I think, a gem of a show that people forget about, created by Paul Simms, which worked out well because I didn't take that job and he hired somebody I knew, and that worked out well. So that as I moved to LA, other people I knew moved to LA. But anyway.
That was Lou, by the way.
That was Lou Morton. Lou took the job. Yes, exactly. Lou Morton is my number 2 on Veep, and he took that job when I didn't. But Seinfeld was like nothing I'd ever seen, both as a comedy person, but also as a New Yorker too, and dare I say, as a Jew in New York. I mean, it was just sort of like, oh my God, these people, these are. I sit in a diner with my friends talking about nonsense. I mean, I wasn't then going and doing stand-up, but it was the same, and George's, if you will, long-term sort of grudge holding and sort of feuds with people that didn't necessarily know he was feuding with. That's my life. I mean, and the great sort of Seinfeld stories really came from all the writers' lives. I mean, if you've ever seen, she hates when I bring this up, but if you've seen the Man Hands episode of Seinfeld, that's my wife. She grew up on a farm, and she had very sort of rough, farmy hands, whereas these are the hands of somebody who's never worked a day in their life. They're smooth and beautiful like a baby's hands, and I encourage you to come and touch them later when this is done. I don't know if we're getting a close-up, but they are really special. And she has these hands where she grew up on a farm, and obviously it changed to man hands, whatever. But that is I think obviously the great ideas are you take something that's real and kind of whatever. But my early episodes, especially when I go through my episodes, I can tell you very specifically. My first episode was an episode called The Pool Guy, where the Jerry story is that Jerry's at a health club, and there's a guy who's sort of the towel boy at the club, and they kind of the guy becomes a little too friendly. And that was actually based on a friend of mine that I've grown up with who joined a club, and another guy we went to school with was working at the club as sort of a towel guy. And so it was this weird thing of we went to school together, but I'm a member. It was this really interesting, I thought, class thing, whatever. That's in there. The notion of Susan wanting to spend time with Elaine, and then George getting angry that sort of like she knows all of their like funny words and all the stuff, whatever. That was my college experience with a roommate's girlfriend. And don't say her name, George. One of my roommates is here, and I literally could just hear her name said very loudly. And we were just sort of like, the first time she walked into the room and said one of our stupid like movie quotes, because that's what idiots do. We were just like taken aback of like who told her the secret words, and so that's the Susan story in there. Kramer becomes the 777 film guy. The hello and welcome to Movie Phone. That storyline. I know this. I sound like. And then in the 1800s we had Movie Phone. For those of you, Movie Phone was something you would call a phone number and press buttons to find out when movies were playing.
Yeah,
Boy, we sound crazy. But. Oddly enough, at Harvard University, all of the phone numbers of the students were 493. So if you were a student, you had your phone number was 493, and then you had 4 digits. And if you wanted to dial another student from your room, you didn't have to dial the 4 and the 9. You just dialed the 3. And so we knew 2 guys, Jamie and Tom, whose phone number was 493-3FI, and in Boston it was 333 film, not 777 film, and they used to get calls for Movie Phone, and they would, they were annoyed by it, right. And so I took that, and of course Kramer starts helping people with it. But the point being is, like back in the Seinfeld days, like when people would apply for jobs, we would basically go, give us a list of stories, and you'd get a list of stories, and it was always interesting because you would see these sort of first instinct ideas that were terrible. I cannot tell you the number of people who sent in, there's one idea that people, like every person who didn't get hired had on their list. Right. And I would ask you to guess, but I just don't think you would ever guess it in a million years. So I will tell you. The terrible idea that Seinfeld would never do, because it's schlocky and sitcom-y and all the things Seinfeld wasn't, but that was pitched to us by writer after writer after writer, was ... George dates a transvestite and doesn't know it's a man. So the second you saw that on a list, it's like, whatever. Ow. But you'd go through these lists and you'd see them trying to come up with stuff, and then you'd get to one and you'd go, like, wait a second, what is this thing about the fight in the electronics store? That happened to you, didn't it? And it'd be like, oh yeah, that happened. It's like, that's the only good idea on the list. And that has carried me through Seinfeld, Curb, even into Veep, in terms of, if something isn't true on some level, it's going to be fake. I mean, that sounds stupid, but it's that simple. And it doesn't always have to be from your life. It can be based on history. It can be stories you heard. In the first episode of Veep, have people seen the season premiere of this season of Veep? Yeah. I'll give you a quick version, which is, there's the opening scene, and I'm sorry if I'm ruining it, but it doesn't ruin too much. Selena is on her way in Iowa to make an announcement. And so she's on the plane, and you're intercutting between her and the people on the ground, and you're going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. She's getting the speech ready, they're getting ready, blah, 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 blah. The plane lands, she opens the doors and says, hello, Iowa. There's nobody there. It's an empty airport. And then you cut to the other people at the airport going, ma'am, where are you? And she's going, I'm at the airport. And they're going, where at the airport? Don't tell me I'm at the airport. I'm standing here with my dick in my hand in whatever, a silver, I don't even know, not Silver, Colorado Springs. It was like Cedar Falls, and she goes, we're in Cedar Rapids, thank you. And it's Cedar Rapids. That's something that happened to Obama, that was told to us by a couple of the Obama guys. Now, it wasn't his announcement, but you hear that story, and I mean, we would bring in people into the Veep writers room. That story goes, that guy leaves, and I just turn to the writers and go, well, we've got our opening scene of Veep. I mean, I just like, you hear a story like that, and you just go, that's the opening scene of season 7. It's that simple. And again, there's just a truth to these things that I love. Have we used up all the time?
the truth. This is awkward, because my favorite show that you wrote is The Abstinence. Is that happened? The abstinence, by the way, is when George stops having sex and becomes really smart.
I'm only in a. I only helped on that one. That wasn't a whole thing.
Story. That's what you're saying.
I think it was a partial story that was also, again, sort of a little bit of a parody at the time of there were some other things like that. I don't remember what the rest of the stories are in there. And obviously, look, you take license with things. You know, things start that way. But it's that thing of like the germ of something. You know, and that's you know, again, just like. It is that improv yes and. So it's sort of like, okay, great. Someone's got a phone that's 777 film. Great, that's great. Now what? What else happens? Well, he starts helping people, whatever. Okay, that's a funny scene. Then what? Well, eventually he can give George the wrong movie, and then now you have something happening. So again, it's like, what is a story? Because locations aren't stories, and there's a lot of things that aren't stories. Stories are stories, which again sounds very stupid and trite, but it is true. And you'd be surprised when you get out to LA and you start talking to people and writers that have risen up the ranks, and you know, and it's sort of like, no, that's not a story. Tell me, you know, what is a story? You know, one of the great things that I learned on my early days of Seinfeld was I got to Seinfeld, and you'd pitch Larry and Jerry stories for the characters, basically. So it's like, here's a Kramer, here's a Jerry, and you'd get each one approved, and you would try and you needed all four. And in a perfect world, you would come up with one story that involved two of the characters, because then you'd have a little more room to play with. But you'd get your four stories done. I remember on my first episode, getting the four stories, and then I outlined act one of a 2-act structure of what I thought, as a fan of Seinfeld and a professional comedy writer for 3 years, what I thought was act one of the show. And I remember Larry coming in, and basically it was almost like my outline was a big trash bag, and he kind of stepped on it and just kind of mushed the trash way down. And what I thought was this big full trash bag was actually now only this full. And he just kind of kept doing that until I learned to do it myself, of like, doing a scene, and in every scene, story is moving forward, and we're going to keep everybody moving forward. Everything's going to keep moving forward, and story. So what I thought was the end of Act 1 was barely the end of the second scene. I guess if you think about where I thought the show was going, it was barely the act break, and so then I'm forced into brand new territory, so that where it ends has nothing to do with where I necessarily originally thought that show was going, because in the desire to keep things moving, story, I've now gone to this just other place. And, you know, again, the lessons you sort of take with you from those places, you know, I say it to this day. I've told him, he knows it too. You know, when you talk about the writers that were influences on my life, you know, Larry David taught me to write sitcoms, and it's just structure. On Curb Your Enthusiasm, as you probably know, we don't really work from scripts. We work from these very, very long outlines. But believe me, you could take one of our outlines and write a show in a night if you had to, because the outlines are that thorough. They're missing the, hi, how are you? I'm good, whatever. But the key jokes, the key information that needs to be sort of imparted in every scene, the larger the joke ideas of this is a misunderstanding, which leads to that. And then he pulls this out from earlier in the scene, blah, 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 blah. It's all there in the outline. And that's why I always laugh when you watch some of these people who kind of go like, oh no, we're doing it like Curb. It's all improv. Mm-hmm. You don't improv your outline. They're improving all of it. And that's why it's just this sort of meandering nonsense. You know, like I said, it's outline, structure. And that's what Larry taught me. That's what I sort of do at Veep. That's what I sort of have taught the writers, if you will, at Veep, or anyone that needed to be taught it. It's just that's sort of, you know, that's sort of my, I guess, guiding principle, if you will.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the difference, because it seems to me like Seinfeld was more of a traditional writer's room. And then when you work on with Larry on
No,
Curb,
I mean, Seinfeld really was. I mean, that's the other thing,
okay,
too. And you guys probably, I don't know to what extent you know about writers' rooms. A lot of sitcoms in LA are written in writers' rooms. And I am here to tell you writers' rooms are terrible. I'm sure there's a lot of fine shows that come out of them, and I know that's true. I can't stand writers' rooms. They're to me, it's groupthink. It's it's sort of joke-like substances, not jokes. Writing comes from somebody, and that somebody can be a team, it can be a group of people, but it's usually a smallish group of people. About the largest team I worked for many years with 2 other guys. There were 3 of us writing together. But even when we wrote together, we split scenes up and wrote them individually and then put them together and kind of rewrote together. The notion of sort of composing sentences, 3 people, or even composing sentences together is pointless. At Seinfeld, as I said before, you were pitching your stories, and you were then basically responsible for your episode, and then you would finish your episode and give it to Larry and Jerry. And when Larry left, Jerry sort of instituted kind of an executive committee. So there would be rewriting. It was usually Jerry, the writer, and like 1 or 2 of the more senior people. So I'm not going to lie, it was definitely a mini writer's room of sorts, but punching up, making something funnier, I think it has actual real value. A writer's room can have real value. But original thought, or the idea of people taking responsibility, because something that happens in a writer's room is we're on a show and we need stories for our, all our characters that are, fun and in New York and dating and whatever the stupid show is. And it's like, you've got a great idea and you've got a great idea. And we put those in because those are great ideas, only it's your turn to write the episode because you're the 3rd most senior person. And so now you're taking their really good ideas and either writing them, maybe you're okay at writing them, but maybe you're not okay at writing them. And so whose episode is it? His name's on it. They're your good ideas. Not that obviously all writing is eventually collaborative, but the idea of this is going to be your episode. You're going to go off and you're going to be responsible for outlining this thing and kind of bringing it home. And it doesn't mean we're not going to rewrite it. It doesn't mean I'm not going to rewrite on top of you and all of these things. But the core of the episode is going to be yours, and it is your responsibility. And again, that is how Larry taught me to do it. That's how I do it. I'm a big believer in it.
And then you came back to Larry to Curb.
Yeah.
And that was a completely different experience.
Well, different in the sense of, again, we didn't have scripts. It was at that point, I basically, my partners and I worked with Jeff Schaffer, who created The League, if you guys know The League, and Alec Berg, who does Barry and did Silicon Valley with Mike Judge. So we've all kind of been in and around HBO for a long time, and we went to school together. We were on the Lampoon together. We've been friends forever. We worked together many, many years, and basically somewhere after Seinfeld, we started writing movies together, and we had written a teen comedy called Eurotrip, which maybe 1 or 2 of you have seen, more than one of you, which at the time was R-rated, and so needless to say, no one really saw it, and then it got great sort of shelf life when sort of 12 and 13-year-olds were allowed to see it at home on video or DVD or whatnot. Anyway, you hate to say this, but we kind of finished Eurotrip and no one was really looking for us to direct anything. And we sort of needed an office. And Larry was kind of like, why don't you help me break the new season of Curb and you guys can have offices. And it was great because we would work. It was basically just the 3 of us and Larry just pitching stories. And, he'd go off, but we would outline stuff with him and he would kind of come and go and we would work on our movie stuff in between, whatever. And then he would go off to do the actual production, which was always hilarious because he would kind of come in one day and be like, okay, we need these offices. So basically just sort of throw us out of the offices. We did a season like that, and then the second time we came back, we ended up actually exec producing, and we started directing the episodes and kind of hanging out through production and editing and all of that, which obviously was even more fun. And again, yes, it was at the end of the day, they're all Larry's shows. Yeah. We're putting our stuff into those. We're pitching him stories and whatnot. But we were a pretty, look, does it break the rule a little bit because there were 4 of us? Yeah, maybe a little bit. But we'd all been together so long. It was never like writer's room-esque. It was very concentrated, I guess is what I'll simply say.
Just sitting around and pitching stories and
Just,
exchanging
we
jokes.
used to, again, all pre-iPhone, we all used to just walk around with a little pad of paper in our pockets, and it's just like, and then writing down things that, to this day, I left my phone in the green room. I still have now on like a note-taking app, I just still have Curb Your Enthusiasm ideas written down, People tell me stories. I heard a story the other day about basically somebody made a donation in somebody else's name, but sort of accidentally made it to a far-right group that I don't think they quite realized was as far-right as it was. And so then the person who was the donation's name was made in, ended up on these extreme, like, right-wing mailing lists. And so what was supposed to be sort of a honoring you with this like charity group that helps children, turned out it was this sort of anti-abortion thing or whatever. I don't know quite what it was, but it's like, I'll write that down, and I'm not working on Curb, but I'll write that down, and maybe I'll use that someday somewhere. But to this day, I write those, I write sort of what I call, what you call them what you want, Seinfeld, Curb, or whatever, my next show might be, but they're ideas, right. They're coming out of human interaction. Yeah.
But you were rightly saying, and I've heard this from many other people, that the showrunner is their show, and then you're there to support and help. These cases, yes. Both cases, Larry was, the head of that.
On Curb, look, it's a blurry line in that, Larry listened to us. He would get angry sometimes. He liked to joke that like we each had a vote and he had 4 votes and whatever. But he would be like, he'd listen, and he would be angry that he listened, but he would listen. It doesn't get much better than that. I'll tell you honestly. It just it's life with Larry. It's just great. So we were showrunners. I mean, we were certainly doing a lot of the, we were there for location scouting and all of those things, and in the edit room with him and all of those things. And look, at the end of the day, obviously, it's his show. I mean, look, I'm the showrunner of Veep, but at the same time, Julia is my partner and is the star of the show. Yes. And so it would certainly not do me any good to be the showrunner of Veep and have her hating the show we were making. So, you do have to think about things of that nature as well. Yeah.
And how was that transition from coming from Curb to, taking over Veep after Mandel decided to leave?
The problem sort of is, I guess, I was sort of, Larry sort of, I guess, for lack of a better word, Larry, both at Seinfeld and then Curb and then a little bit of HBO, they ruined me, I guess I'll simply say, in that I got unfortunately very used, at least in my television writing, on working on really good shows that actually cared about being funny with very little interference. Guess what? That, it turns out, is not what a lot of the networks are interested in doing. And, so I would have these really great runs on like Seinfeld, and then I signed a deal to develop TV for Touchstone Television. And they aired, I ended up doing, they made nothing I wrote, except Kevin Smith and I did a couple episodes of the Clerks, an animated version of Clerks that they moved to like June and dumped after airing it twice. So that is the highlight of my sort of ABC career following Seinfeld, despite the fact I was heavily recruited, as were a lot of other Seinfeld writers. And then I went to Curb, and then, I would write things occasionally. I would write pilots for sort of the more mainstream networks that, would never kind of go anywhere. And luckily, TV changed. I mean, by the way, that's the great thing. I mean, all of the streaming, the HBOs, the premium cables, whatever you want to talk about it, but it's just like you got these places that, yes, obviously they're a little niche, and obviously nothing anybody does comes close to Seinfeld's Thursday night 9 p.m. ratings at its height, but you are allowed to make good television a lot of these places. And I don't know, for me, still a lot of the networks, Jeff Alec and I, who I mentioned before, we had this sort of thing, I think I told you about this, we talked about it, we had this sort of, we called it piss pie. And what piss pie is you as a writer, you're a baker. and you make a pie, you make an apple pie, and your dream is to have it in the big bakery with the big window where people come to buy pies. That's the network. That's whatever. That's ABC. And they sell a lot of pies, and you go to them and you bring them your pie that you killed yourself on, and they taste it and they go, oh, this is a really good pie. We really like this pie. We'd like to put this pie in our window. Oh my God, they want to put my pie in the window. They want to make my show. Here's the thing though. Put a little piss in it. What? Just put a little human piss in it. Trust us. And you sit there and you go, and by the way, you especially do this when you're a lot younger and a little less jaded, and you go, well, Jesus, look at all the pies they're selling. Look at all the people coming in and buying pies. Do they all have, like they must know something, right? So you go and you piss in your pie and you make another pie and you bring it back and they taste it and they go, oh man, this is delicious. This is one of the best pies we've ever tasted. I think it needs a little more piss. I know they've got the bakery. Okay, go back, piss, whatever. Here it is. Oh yeah, this is really becoming something. One note. A little more piss, just like just some drops of piss, just a little more. And okay, here it is. You bring them, you piss a little more in it, you bring them the pie, and they go, all righty, here we go. And they cut into the pie, and they stab a big piece with their fork, they bite into it, and they go, this fucking tastes like piss. What the fuck is wrong with you? Get this out of here. And that's honestly what it was like working sort of on network television. And so, like I said, Larry sort of ruined us. We worked on the show, and everybody, and this is going back. If you look, I think Peter Melman was the writer from Seinfeld who ended up, I think he did like a season or two of a show called It's Like You Know. He was the high mark. The rest of us, we all signed these really great deals, and none of us made anything because we would go and expected things to be like Seinfeld and expected a certain amount of the respect and the desire to make a funny show, and we would get lectured on what Seinfeld was. I remember, I kid you not, there was a British show, if people are fans of British sitcoms, called Men Behaving Badly. Anybody know that show? You can kind of guess the gist of it, if you will. And they decided to do an American version at NBC. Oh my God, 5 minutes till the Q&A. And they decided to do an American version of it called Men Behaving Badly with Ron Eldard and Rob Schneider. So, okay, you can see Schneider being funny in this and all that kind of stuff. And I remember I had friends working on the show, and I remember going to the pilot. And again, the show is called Men Behaving Badly, right? Okay, we can all agree on what that is. And I remember at the end of the show, there was some moment where, I don't know, everybody makes up, and then Schneider is like asleep on the couch, and they add this thing where like Eldard like takes a blanket and covers him up. And the network like lost their minds. They loved it so much. And it's like the show is called Men Behaving Badly, not men covering other men on a couch with a blanket, with a chamois blanket. And you just go, what the fuck show are you making here? And so, places like HBO, what I just love about it is the respect for, I don't know what else to say. I'd like to say for what I do, but not just what I do. I mean, I love a lot of HBO shows, and that's because they hire people and then let them do their job. And they give notes. I don't want to make it seem like it's some sort of weird, like, oh, they don't say anything to me. They give notes all the time, but they're well thought out, and you're allowed to explain why I'm working on an episode right now. I just put the 6th episode of Veep, I finished editing it, and I send it out to basically a couple of the exec producers, and the HBO people look at it, and then a day goes by, and then I kind of like will take the notes and look at that and whatever. And there's a character in it, I won't get into the specifics because I don't want to ruin anything, where I think at the end of the day, myself and the writers find this character funnier than HBO does. They brought up that they didn't think it, like the amount of time. I said, we're going to have to agree to disagree. But I looked at it and I found there were a couple of things where I went, you know what, that's not necessary. Nothing that I love. The parts I loved are in there and will be in there when you see it, whatever, in 4 weeks. But, and when you're given a note respectfully, you can be respectful back. And so I was at least able to go, let me go in and try. Let me look for some places where I can get rid of stuff where I don't whatever, but I am answering the note, which is there is technically now 30 seconds less, which is actually the note. As opposed to I wrote a show with 2 other writers, 2 friends. We did a show right before I got Veep. Actually, it was like sort of my one last chance or whatever. Not one last chance, but my last attempt, if you will. Wrote a show for CBS, and basically it was called The Mistake, and the basic gist of the show was older parents who were like 45, 50 years old in episode 1, as their last child is leaving for college, accidentally get pregnant and decide to have the kid. And you have the baby by the end of the first episode. So what the show is, The Mistake is the baby, and the show is about their kids who are horrified, their old friends who thought they'd all be golfing, the new parent friends. I mean, it was, look, I'm not going to lie, it was a sitcom, but it was a pretty decent idea for a sitcom, if I say so myself. And there was a joke in there, which is, there's an old trick, which is that if you have multiple kids, when like we had our 2-year-old and we had our second child, this older child always gets jealous of the new baby. And so there's this idea, you bring your baby, the older child to meet the baby, and you give the 2-year-old a present from the baby. That's sort of a parenting trick. I realize you're all very young. But that's a trick, and it kind of works in a really stupid way because kids love presents. And so we did that in this episode where there's basically this 24-year-old who hates the baby until they give him a present from the baby. And the present they give him, I don't know, it was a Star Wars toy because I like Star Wars stuff. And so it was that. And I remember being on a notes call where they basically told us they didn't like it. And wouldn't it be better if the baby gave the person something that was more useful, like an iPhone or an iPad? And it was sort of like, that's not a joke, you dumb idiot. Except I'm not allowed to say that. I can only go, yeah, and then just whatever. And I'll tell you, that show never got made, and it's to this day not the crowning achievement of my career, but what happens is, and I don't want to name names, but there were people they wanted in it that I just didn't want the show with that person, because what happens is, I'm going to use you, Jose, as an example. Yes. They force you to put Jose, who's very not funny and terrible, in your comedy. And so your script goes from being that really funny script that everybody likes to the shitty Jose pilot. And again, piss pie, 24-year-old me makes the Jose show. 48-year-old me, or whatever I was, 45-year-old, actually ended up just saying, no, we're not going to do it with these people. Either make it with some good people or don't. And to this day, once a year, somebody goes, whatever happened to that script, The Mistake? It was pretty good. As opposed to that shitty pilot, which, again, why does this taste like piss? Anyway.
Good. Well, I'm glad that HBO is not that way.
Yes.
And that they're letting you do
And there's a lot of places that are not that way. I mean, I think that's, again, the sort of niche television, all of this. I think the streamers are just more open to interesting ideas, weird ideas, different voices, different kinds of cast, people that aren't all just beautiful. I mean, the worst thing that ever happened to television in some ways is that Friends was a giant hit. Because because that was their game plan. The networks, every idea the networks ever had is just put pretty people in it and it'll be great. And it never worked until Friends, because they happened to be very pretty people who were really funny. And that's a compliment, I really do mean that. The problem is 99% of the other pretty people are not particularly funny. It's a much rarer breed. But their go-to move is just always, put some pretty people in it. And when you bring them a funny person, it's just like, really? Anyway.
All right. So, First of all, you chose an excellent example. All of my students are here, and they know that I'm not funny, and I would not do well on any of those shows, so that's perfect. Second, if you have a question, please make your way to that microphone in the back so that we can start taking questions from the audience as well. I know that
will only be taking questions about urination and pie making.
Exactly. And while we're getting those questions, I want to tell you something. Really, I'm really glad that HBO is not that way, because we got to enjoy Veep. And Veep has been really good to you. The industry loves it, and you've had great recognition for it. And just as you were doing that, then the tragedy struck, right? And
yeah, I mean, we've been making the final season of Veep for 2 years. As you all probably know, Julia was diagnosed with cancer. Actually, she found out, I believe, the Friday before the Emmys. We won the Emmy on Sunday night, and she won an Emmy as well. And basically, she had been told, you 99% have cancer. Monday they confirmed it, and then obviously we shut down and whatever. And so it's been a very strange journey. Obviously, beyond thrilled that she is fine and good and herself. But it's like when I was talking about movie phone, and that was whatever 25 years, 30 years ago. Think about. We didn't make Veep for 2 years. Think about what happened in politics in those 2 years. So all of a sudden, it seemed like we were making a show from the 1800s as well, a very quaint show where we did an episode 3 seasons ago where people ran around with their hair on fire because the president accidentally sent a tweet. You can look that episode up. So, we wrote a show. If you think about what Veep is, so much of Veep, and I will get to these questions, sorry, really quick. Sure. So much of what Veep was, the president or somebody or the vice president misspeaking and then paying a consequence. That doesn't exist. The notion of what are they privately like? Oh my God, look how they speak behind closed doors. Is there such a thing as a closed door? So much of Selena was about getting comeuppance for her bad behavior. Is there any comeuppance left in the universe? Along with all of the other things, in terms of, and I will simply say the show Veep, and I do always want to make this clear both for people in the room or anybody watching, the show Veep is very sort of politically agnostic. We never mention parties. No one's a Democrat, no one's a Republican. David Mandel is a hardcore Democrat, and so my views are not the views of Veep and vice versa, but I think even if you support the dear man, you have to admit how much the country has changed in 2 years. And so this season has been sort of, it's almost like every time, it's like a steeplechase. Every time they put something up for us to jump over, we got over it, and then there was an even higher one. And I'm just really proud of I think if you are watching, I think you'll really dig where we kind of got to.
Excellent. All right, so please just tell us your name and then your question, please.
Hi, I'm Allie. Thank you very much. This is really fun.
Cool.
I thought it was cool you were talking about the Harvard boys versus
Chicago improvisers.
Chicago what?
Improvisers.
Yeah, Chicago improvisers. And kind of those different styles and how they can marry well. And I was wondering if you can expound more on different styles of being funny and how that has been a presence throughout your very cool career.
I just think people are. Look, everybody is funny differently. It's a tough one. I don't know if I can categorize it. You know what I mean? But it's like, when I'm making Veep, when we're doing Veep, we do a lot of when we're working on a scene the night before. Often I will identify lines, or maybe Julia points out a line or two that she'd like to see some other choices for. And the writers will go through the scenes and send me what we call alts. And every time we get to a new scene, I'll take the alts and I'll look through, and this is better. Maybe I want to try this on a second or third take, whatever. I can't say I can do it on all of them, but on a lot of them I can go, oh, you wrote this. You wrote that. Why can I do that? I don't have a great answer. I guess I'm just a big believer in different styles. So I can't necessarily speak to what that means, but I just think certainly having different voices, and it's tough. I do have a lot of Harvard Lampoon writers in terms of a certain level of what I think funny is. but that doesn't mean they all write alike, if that makes any sense. So to categorize them as the same is wrong too, much in the same way Chicago improvisers or any improvisers are different within the world of improvisation. I just think, when I get a joke that I couldn't have thought of myself in a million years, there's nothing better than that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I never could have wrote this joke. Only you could have written that joke. And I'm putting it in the show. We're gonna shoot it, and then when I get to the edit room, I'm gonna put it in the show. And if it were just me, we wouldn't have that joke. I don't know how else to say it.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
A joke is a joke no matter where it comes from.
Yeah. I mean, again, we were talking a little bit more about the staff in this case, but this last year we actually, you'll see her name. We have a staff writer on the show, and she started off as one of the writer's assistants, and she was sending in jokes, and I was using them, not knowing I was using. I mean, I'm sure there's some Writers Guild violation there, but she was getting stuff into Veep.
Yeah.
Made her a writer. How do you not do that? Right. I mean, I don't know what else to say, but it's just like these are jokes that are fighting their way through a lot of other great joke writers to rise to what I think of at least as the top. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Please.
Hi, my name's Kim. Thank you for taking my question.
Sure.
As a writer, if you had to choose between plot and character, what would you focus on more?
I guess I don't believe it's a separate thing. I think character is plot and vice versa. I think I'll give you an example. When I was talking about the pool guy, my first episode of Seinfeld, the Elaine storyline, we didn't talk about Julia's storyline in that episode, was basically myself as a longtime fan of Seinfeld when I joined the show, and I guess that was season 6, of the story that I pitched was basically Elaine realizing she did not have any female friends, that she was basically a guy's girl, and therefore deciding I'm going to have a female friend, which then of course became Susan, George's girlfriend, which then bumped into that storyline. But that is a story and a plot based on character and vice versa. And when you have well-drawn characters and I didn't create the characters on Veep, Armando Iannucci did. I've definitely, along the way, there are some characters we've added to the thing that I've created. But when these characters are working the way they should, then sometimes you're in a scene, and I don't want to say they're writing it themselves, but it's just like, that character would say this, or that character would think that, or can you imagine? We have a joke coming up. I'll ruin a joke. I think it's this week, so I'm not ruining that much. It's episode 3, where Selena is going to one of the many sort of fairs in Iowa to, get voters. That's a big thing, the Iowa Fair. So we did our version of it. And she's walking through the fairgrounds, and a guy at a booth jumps out to her and kind of, like a hawker, and he goes, "Madam President, guess your age, guess your weight." And she reacts to it as if he basically spit in her face or shot her in the shoulder. Just the horror of it. That's not anything you can do, that joke, except Selena Meyer in that situation at a fair. And we didn't sit down and go, oh, we're going to write that joke. It was like we were writing that fair, and then it was like, oh my God, wouldn't it be funny if someone said, "Can I guess your age?" And then it was like, where's the Secret Service? So I don't choose. Don't ever choose. They're together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
Hey, how's it going? My name's Danny. What up, Jose? How you doing?
What's up?
Big fan of Veep. I don't know if you were around right at the conception of the show, but I know it's got a very...
I was not. Armando Iannucci created the show, did the first 4 years, left to go back to England, and then I'd been doing obviously Curb and stuff, and they brought me in, and so I had nothing to do with it. It was very much formed by those guys. But go ahead.
Well, he just took it and threw it out of the park. By the way,
and he's totally killed it. Well, I'm gonna spin my question then to a more updated question.
Sure.
So we've seen Selena become. Well, I don't want to spoil too much for it, but we've seen her kind of go her political career as she's risen in the ranks politically. how do you guys find yourself not retelling the same stories as we're kind of going around the same?
Look, I'll say two things. One of the things that was sort of set up before I ever got there, I think when he decided to make her president the first time, was a desire on his part not to just keep doing the same thing, not to just go, let's just do 9 years of her being Veep. And dare I say, when he left, it was the cliffhanger of who's going to be president, the tie, the electoral college tie. And we had a real option there of like, she could be president. We've seen that. A lot of people thought we were going to make her Veep again. We've seen that.
Right.
What if the show now becomes about former president of the United States? We've not seen that. But, look, any show, when you get to a 7th season, it does start to get hard. And I won't lie, this season, look, on the one hand, she has run for president before, and she's definitely done it before. And if you go backwards and look at that season, it kind of got a little bit abridged because she then became president, and so that storyline went away. But what was interesting to me was having sort of won and then lost, but now to run again, having lost, which is not, when we previously saw her running, it was as a sitting vice president. I thought there was a lot of interesting stuff, and I sort of hate to say this because everyone always assumes she is Hillary Clinton. But to go back to, if you will, when Hillary ran against Obama, the notion of what it is to be sort of a presumed nominee, like the assumption of she's going to walk away with it, and what that means, and how obviously with Obama she didn't win, right, and what that means. And so I felt like there was enough interesting new things that we could sort of do with her. And again, so much of politics has changed. The way you campaign, the way you interact with the voters, all of these things, the way everything is so partisan, and by the way, people are generally more horrible. It felt different enough. But I will not lie to you, we worked on a debate episode and then went back and watched an old one of the old debate episode and went, ugh, this is too close, and threw it in the garbage. I mean, you have to have the discipline. I mean, I don't know what else to say. You have to have the discipline, but it's hard. And by the way, it's when people kind of go, well, why is the show ending? There's multiple reasons. One of them, though, is, hey, 7 seasons in, it's hard to think of a new way to call, it's like you start going, and I always joke about this, like, what can we call Jonah? Have we ever called him Godzilla's taint? Well, we called him King Kong's taint. That seems close. And you just sort of, we're running out of giant things to combine with other foul words. You know what I mean? If you think about like a Jonah, sort of like, make your own Jonah insult. And that's because 7 years in, and by the way, I remember on Seinfeld going through that near the end. 9 seasons in, all these other shows were very much starting to kind of do the Seinfeld thing. I remember we worked really hard on what I think would have been a really funny storyline about George having to get Frank Costanza marijuana for his cataracts. I mean, can you imagine Jerry Stiller high? And then, unfortunately, we heard Sybil. If you guys remember, Sybil Shepherd had a show called Sybil that was doing something about like marijuana and cataracts. We threw it in the garbage. You have to, but you do start to run out of things.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
The constant innovation.
Hi, my name is John. I'm a student here at DePaul studying screenwriting. And you mentioned that you've always known you've loved comedy, even before you got into the film industry. Yeah. Do you, if you're a comedy writer, someone currently working, do they necessarily have had to always like comedy?
No, I don't think that's true, although I do think at some point you do get into it. And I think they're connected in the sense of I was always into it. And then as I started to think that this is what I was going to do, I got even more into it. And so look, I can only speak for myself. I, became that guy trying to track down like sort of, like Rowan Atkinson stand-up performances because I was way into like Blackadder. You know what I mean? Like, so you become that guy. The one thing I'll say, and this is my own thing, is this is hard. There are people that are funny. There are people that are not funny. And you can really try and teach a not funny person a lot of ways of writing funny. there's got to be a limit, and a lot of people don't ever want to say that. And I'm sorry, I'm going to say it, which is to say, there are some people that are just not funny. I realize that's not your question, but that's now where I've taken it. But no, I don't think it's a requirement that like you had to like memorize a Steve Martin routine at age 8 to be a comedy writer. I do not think that is a requirement. Maybe it helps, but it's not a requirement.
Great, yeah, thank you. And it's just something, developing my voice that I feel like I've kind of gone to and not expected it to, but you answered my question.
I mean, to me, again, as you talk about your voice, and it's like, it's hard. Look, I look back on the writer I was, and I'm such a different writer. Like I said, I think I'm a better writer now, but it's an evolution as you do find your voice, and you're always finding new parts, and you're taking things from people you work with, but also by exposing yourself, whether it's old British comedy, whether it's stand-up, whatever it is, by just simply exposing yourself to stuff, I think you'll pick bits and pieces out of it, I guess, is what I would say.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
And if you haven't seen Blackadder, I
It's
highly recommend it.
really good, yeah.
Hi, my name is Owen. I'm an aspiring TV writer. Coming into Veep so many seasons into the show, what was your philosophy in terms of blending like the old style of the writer's room with like your kind of philosophies as a showrunner and like how you function in terms of like writing TV?
Well, for the most part, I guess I'll say two things. I guess number one was there were a lot of, I guess, seismic changes to Veep when that happened anyway, which was it had previously been shot in Baltimore. We moved it to LA. It was previously an all British writing staff that wrote in the UK and then went to Baltimore. And three Brits stuck around, but most of them sort of either went on to other things or some of them worked with Armando on his next stuff. And so they left. So there was a lot of new writers. So it wasn't like anybody was necessarily like sort of going, that's not how we do it. But I'll give you an example. Armando and I think are very different people. I love what he does, but I don't work the way he does. And I think, as I've said to you 1,000 times in this, today, structure, outline. And I think he often is a guy that finds stuff in a wonderful way. It's just not how I work. So when I, map out a season, I like to know, like, here's my first scene, here's the last scene of the season, here are the episodes, here's what we're going to do. And you map it all out, and then you hold on to that map. And a lot of even what we've done over these 3 years came out of when I was first taking the job. That's just how I work. I shoot long, but I shoot scenes that are very sort of set, and I don't cut a lot of those scenes. I shrink them down, and I take the air out of them, and I make it rapid fire. But he definitely, I think, and again, I don't want to put words in his mouth. My understanding, though, is he kind of often shoots these very long scenes and then kind of finds the scene in the edit room of what was there. It's not how I do it. So when I took over the show, they had 3 editors, because why wouldn't you have 3 editors? That's how Armando did it. And it was sort of presented like, this is how a show like Veep works. Okay, so we hired 3 editors. And needless to say, partway through, it was sort of like, why the fuck do I have 3 editors? I have, 2 editors I know and another guy I've never worked with before, that it just didn't really work itself out. But he didn't ever need to be hired. I could have done the show with 2 editors. And after we got through that season, there are now 2 editors every year because we don't need 3 editors. And people get used to how things are, but so stuff like that definitely happens and happened. But it wasn't really, nobody was fighting me on it in any way, shape, or form, if that makes sense. I'll tell you, when I wrote the first episode, which of course, the first episode of my tenure of Veep, which more or less coincided with them winning the Emmy for the first time, we had a table read that was a fucking disaster. I mean, I'm talking like nobody looking at me in the eye disaster of the cast. My writers, I think, understood what was going on, but the cast, I guarantee, I know they all, they've sort of all but admitted it now, but like, I think they were just like, this was a mistake, this is not whatever. And it's funny because in my mind, when I look back, and I know what that script was, and I know exactly what the script became, if I were to actually show you and take you through scene by scene what I wrote that everybody hated and what worked, it was a pretty, to me, when I look back, although at the time it seemed huge, it was an adjustment. It was a very simple, subtle adjustment. And the adjustment was the following. This was how I started the show, which was, I think I had her waking up that morning in a bedroom scene with Gary coming in and her complaining about the show, and then they went downstairs and she complained to some more people, and then they talked about some other stuff, and that was it. And so, and people hated it, and it was awful, and it wasn't Veep. And they're right, it wasn't Veep, and because it was closer probably to Seinfeld or a sort of sitcom I had written. And the difference is in Veep, all of that stuff exists, but it hangs on ostensibly sort of a spinal column of doing the job of the work. So new version of the show, you start off with her addressing the American people, and then as they're miking her or unmiking her, she's giving the same complaints that she gave to Gary in my original version. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. But now she's getting mic'd, and then she's walking into another room, and somebody's coming in and going, ma'am, you need to deal with this. And in between the business of running the government, all the same lines from the other version are being said, but they're hanging on the skeleton of being president of the United States. It took a minute to learn. And I was a fan of the show, but it took me a minute to learn. Second up, I rewrote it. Everybody very quite happy. We're all good. And I can look back now and laugh, kind of going, it wasn't that big an adjustment, and yet it was.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
All right. You mentioned a bunch of stuff, and that it's really interesting because you and I have talked about all of the roles that the showrunner has. Yep. Which is not, some showrunners only write, some showrunners only produce, and in your case, you do everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's different for everybody, but I lay out the season, I write and rewrite and overwrite and whatever, and work with the writers on every episode, and then I am on set for every minute of filming. Every minute of filming, I am there, whether I'm directing or next to the director. And then I don't start editing until the season is done shooting, and I edit all of the episodes. And for the most part, even though it's probably my directors do a cut where they do their shot selections, but I don't want them cutting material out of the show. The first season, the directors all took director's cuts, passes, and they all freaked out because, the first cut would be 46 minutes long, and they were freaking out because we're supposed to be 28 minutes long. And they started just cutting wholesale scenes. And so I had to come back, put all the stuff they cut back in, and then start editing. So I don't do that anymore. Sorry. Cool. Hi.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Debbie. It actually segues into what I was going to ask you because you're a showrunner, which is what I think I would love to be. So I wanted to know the main roles as a showrunner and what your favorite parts are about it.
I mean, I hate to say it, it's everything. I mean, it really is. I mean, and it's as much as you want it to be sometimes. I mean, half the art of showrunning is figuring out what to say no to. Because if you would like to see the glasses that they're going to wear or the drink out of, pick your choice, you will find a crew member who's happy to show them to you and get your approval or not approval. But if I looked at every, prop or every, whatever, when would I write? How would you make a show? So it's everything. I mean, and that is a little bit the lesson, is to sort of be the showrunners to figure out how you want to do it. What do you want to know about? How are you going to designate some other people to do some of the other things? You know what I mean? And it's hard. It's honestly hard figuring out how much to do, because obviously at the same time, look, you'd like a little bit of a life. You'd like a little bit of spending some time with your family and things of that nature. But there's no great answer to it. You'll sort of find your style, I think, as you do it. Look, the writer in me always used to think, sometimes like 3 a.m. with some of my favorite writers in the room making each other laugh is as good as it gets. except then I work with a cast that then sometimes says those lines and makes them even funnier than I ever imagined they would be. And then in the edit room, I get to cut it together and put it out there so, I don't have a great answer.
No, that was great. Thank you.
Maybe to help you a little bit with that, you have the writing component, you have the directing component, which is
but that's I guess. But even if you remove the notion of being a showrunner who directs, even as not a director, you're still going to be there with the director, because the director, I'll simply say, works for you as the showrunner. In TV, the showrunner is king. In the movies, the director is king. But in TV, showrunner is king. It's a very big difference, and you will learn it in good ways and bad ways. Mm-hmm. And so, again, it's just got to be what you want it to be. There's no great answer.
Right. And at some point, we even talked about you have to run an office.
It's every little thing, and you'll be surprised. I mean, it's just I can't even explain to you, the idea of anyone asking me where do I want to order lunch from is like the bane of my existence, in that it just seems like another decision that I have to make and I don't want to make because I'm making so many decisions. Right. So things like that start to just drive you slowly mad.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a big fan. My name's Kyle.
Hi.
Studying TV writing. Last quarter I was tasked with writing a spec script, and I didn't watch much TV except for Veep. I binged it. If you live on campus, you get HBO for free, so binge it. Anyway, one of the things I noticed was that you treat cursing like an art form. I don't understand. You could put fucking shit in the script and it'd be funny because it's a curse word, but it's not it doesn't hold weight. But the way Veep does it, it's just
very much. I mean, I appreciate you saying that. It was very much, obviously, sort of, if you will, that came from the original show. That was something that Armando had sort of laid down, and we tried to sort of, pick up the sword in our own way. And it's hard. It's a very funny thing for a show that often tries to be so realistic. No one really quite talks that way. It's actually quite written. It's a very funny sort of two things working against each other, because so much of we pride our show on it sounding real and sounding what a president would say, and then you have these very rococo insults that no human really talks like that in a given moment. And yet it is that, I guess, that sort of odd dichotomy that sort of works. I have no great answer. We spend a lot of time on it. We spend a lot of time thinking about it. Sometimes they don't have to be foul either. Sometimes it's just a weird reference. There was a joke the other night. They were talking about there was a character who is a still closeted fundraiser, and they're talking about the fact that why is somebody closeted in this day and age. And we had a joke in the script originally, something along the lines of it's the worst secret, something about FDR in his wheelchair. I don't even remember what the joke was. And somebody pitched as an alt that went right into the show and is in the show. Since it's Reed Scott, Dan Egan says it's the worst, best kept secret since Clyde Tolson's hysterical pregnancy. Now, a hysterical pregnancy is when a woman thinks she's pregnant but isn't pregnant. Clyde Tolson was a man. He was an FBI agent who was J. Edgar Hoover's boyfriend. Needless to say, he never had a hysterical pregnancy, and yet I'm not sure when that aired on television, no matter how large Veep's audience may or may not be, I can't imagine more than 20 people really enjoyed that joke. But fuck you, I'm one of the 20, so I don't care. But, that's an example of, I don't have a great answer as to why the insults are like that, but there you go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Abby. I'm one of Jose's students in his producing television course, and I have been tasked with the terrifying privilege of being the showrunner for our web series that we're creating.
Very cool.
Yeah. You had talked a little bit about how you learned how to take what you had written and condense it down and condense it down and condense it down. And I was wondering if you could expand upon that a little bit more.
I guess I'll say a couple of things. I mean, it's hard. Look, number one, it's hard. It's a lesson to be learned. It's just no scene should exist if story isn't moving forward. If story isn't moving forward, kill the scene. Now, if it's a great joke, find a way, whatever, find a way to jam some story into it. So if you've got some crazy joke about a guy getting stuck in a refrigerator, that's fine, as long as while he's stuck in that refrigerator, they're telling you, I'm going on that date tomorrow night, or that's a very Seinfeld reference, but you know what I'm saying? Plot must keep moving. If you don't pay the price then, you'll pay the price at the end, where you just don't get to the end because you've exhausted your audience with scenes that aren't moving story forward. If story is moving forward, it's interesting. And if it's interesting, then it can be funny. But they did this thing years ago. You can find it on YouTube, and it's worth checking out. They took sitcoms, and they took the jokes out, okay? And it was really interesting because I think they took something like, Big Bang Theory, and they took the jokes out, and the show was about, 37 seconds long. There's not a lot of story in a show like that. No judgment. I'm just telling you these are facts. And then, something like Friends was somewhere in the middle. It was a couple minutes long. Seinfeld, when you took the jokes out, there was still like a solid 8 or 9 minutes of plot. If you look at an episode of Veep, you could take all the jokes out. We're kind of doing a political thriller. So again, just think story. Just again, keep if you don't have a story, you don't have anything. And you have to figure out a way to have people talking about multiple things at the same time. That's the only way you're going to solve it, or at least elegantly have them segue. Like if I'm telling you about my date last night, that you can then go, and again, I'm being very generic, it's better than my date, and I'm going to tell you, whatever it is, but you've just got to find a way to either think about the scene, how are we going to advance these stories so that, whether it's seeing a scene, whether you're hearing about a scene, whether discussing the scene that just happened, whether setting up where we're going, whatever it is, but just information getting parceled out in a really efficient way. And then the other thing I will simply say, and I'm sure you can let me know that she goes crazy, you're the showrunner, right? Mm-hmm. You're in charge.
Yeah.
It's not a fucking democracy. Make some decisions.
Don't tell me that. I'll get drunk with power.
You know what? Better to get drunk with power and make something that you actually think is right than have it fucking suck, have it be piss pie. And by the way, piss pie can be because your other 11 writers are telling you, we think this is funny. You don't think it's funny? Don't put it in. It's that simple. Die on your own. If you're gonna dig your own grave, dig it to your own specifications at least. You know what I mean?
Thank you so much.
I think one of the things that happens very often, and this has happened to me with my students, is that you ask them to do modifications to the show, or maybe the show is not reaching the number of pages that they would like to have, and the first thing that comes to mind is, let's add some more dialogue. Right? Let's add some more people talking about it.
That's the shit that just comes out in the edit room instantly. It's just, yabbering without stuff moving forward. There's just a limited amount of patience you have for it. And by the way, I think today's audience has even less patience than they used to have. It just, it is what it is. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Taylor. So I was wondering, how do you handle the situation when you're told to put piss in your pie and you don't want to? And
again, this, as I think I said, and feel free to finish. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
And have you ever won that battle?
Yes and no. As I sort of said, look, young me that sort of has more of a desire to get the show on the air, put the piss in the pie a couple of times, or tried to. I actually found in some weird way that sometimes when I tried to give them what they wanted, I couldn't even do that. Whatever it was that they wanted, I couldn't piss in the pie properly to their specifications. I just couldn't do it. Even when I thought I was spoon feeding them plot or things in pilots and stuff, they didn't care for it either. My version of what I thought a terrible writer would do just wasn't working well. You have to be at peace. I'm lucky enough that, as I said, with the Mistake show, where I was okay with comfortable enough to go, I'll get another job. I don't know what else, you know what I mean? It's hard. That's the honest answer. It's hard. You also don't want to get the reputation, which I'm sure I've had from time to time, of being difficult, because then people think you're difficult. But you know what? if you're difficult and you're successful, that's okay. So there's no great answer here. It's all very messy. And look, the honest answer is early in your career, you're going to piss in a lot of pies because at some point or another, it's early in your career and you're trying to get forward. But at some point, and this is what I was sort of saying, especially in sort of this example of you guys making webisodes here at school. I mean, there's no downside. Make it as good as you humanly can. Why compromise on this? I mean, it's not like they're not going to hire you or not hire you for the next thing. You're going to graduate and leave. You know what I mean? It's like, why not try and be as good as you can? But I realize that's not a great answer, but it is an answer.
Thank you.
By the way, if the one asking for peace is the professor, you would do it. No, actually, this is not going to go well with my peers. But in my experience, even students who challenge us, but with real intention, with real heart in it, they surprise us. And I've had former students who have gone to do great careers, and that I remember having big conversations with them about taking stuff out.
Yeah.
And they didn't.
And there's no perfect answer. I mean, there are hilarious shows and pilots in the history of Hollywood that were made exactly the way you would want them to be made, and no one cared for them or liked them. And, there are shows like, like Arrested Development that you sort of sometimes get the sense that Fox sort of kept on the air because they were shamed into it because the critics just said it was good. Yeah. And for the most part, not a lot of people watch. Do you know what I mean? And yet there are terrible shows that millions of people watch every day and in rerun. There's no answers. You can do everything right and still be a disaster. But wouldn't you rather go down knowing it was all right? I mean, that's, again, been my experience.
Hello, my name is Matthew. I want to thank you for your time. I was wondering if you could elaborate on your writing process. Are you one of those people where inspiration just kind of hits you, or are you a daily grinder where you sit down and you're like, I have a page?
I have the worst habits of anyone in the world. I am very aware, and I've worked with the people that sit down and do 10 pages a day. I do not do that. I have never done that. I didn't do it in high school. I didn't do it in college, and I continue not to do it. I wait as long as humanly possible. I gather ideas as I go. I'm thinking about it constantly. I get inspiration in a lot of different places. Morning shower is a great place to sort of think about stuff. But if I think, let's say I'm supposed to write some scenes for something, if I think I can write them in the morning and wake up at 6 a.m. and get them done in time by 10 a.m., then by God, that's when I will start it as late as humanly possible, and I will pat myself on the back for ingenious thinking and getting it done. I don't know what else to say, but yet here I sit, so yeah.
Appreciate it, thank you.
And yet again, I think that's you work with what you have, right?
That's exactly it. I am somebody, and what can I tell you? When Julia got cancer, we kept going with some table reads, which was something that was great because it gave her something to look forward to. We would kind of do a table read right before she would start the next bout of chemo, which obviously got worse and worse and worse, the chemo and whatever. And it was great, and it was wonderful to do, and a lot of that stuff is in the season you're seeing, but I'm also the first to tell you those scripts were kind of flabby and terrible because I'm Columbus. I need ships burning behind me. It's that simple. I need a deadline. I need to feel the breath on my neck, and none of it's good. And yet, again, I continue to do it. Yeah. I'm guessing at this point I'm not going to change. But heed my words as the ghost of Christmas future. Sit down and write 7 pages every day. I don't know what to tell you. Yeah.
And now I'm feeling the heat behind us. I think that we run out of time. And I want to thank David Mandel.
Thank you. Thank you guys for the great questions. Thank you
so much.